Hello, Nick Leifker again, and welcome to GMGT 590, Operations Management. So far this week, we've looked at how to examine a process in detail with a value stream map. We've looked at the characteristics of a just-in-time process. Now it's time to look at the conditions under which that process takes place. After all, a good workplace, one that is designed to make things more efficient, make the process better, is going to help your employees make a better product. And that's ultimately the goal, to get the value to the customer. So, when it comes to your workplace, there's several things we need to take into account. Does it allow for growth? Does it allow for the expansion of the process? Does it allow your employees to work as a group? After all, if working in groups allows people to work a lot better than if they worked alone, and it allows problems to be solved a lot easier than if they were worked alone. So, if not, why not? Why not make it so? That's the primary topic of this lecture: improving the layout of your process. So, for example here, we have a layout here where our workers are in cramped, enclosed spaces. There's not a lot of room to maneuver, and there's no room for collaboration. So we really can't increase our work output, and as a result, we are limited in what we can do with regard to expanding this particular process. So, what can we do? Well, what we can do is we can give them a little more room. Here these two employees are still sharing that one piece of equipment in the middle, but they have more room. They have more room to maneuver, more room to work, and more to the point, they have room to help each other. Also, if we want to expand the process, there's room for a third person if need be. Another example, the classic assembly line layout. This is what everyone has known with regard to manufacturing for the past century. Looks nice, looks okay, but, well, here's a question. For one, if you were to try to divide the work evenly, and you'll recall with a lot of the problems that I had y'all working back in week 2, I said that the work had to be done in order. Well, what if we rearranged the layout such that there was a little more flexibility in that? So that, if we wanted to, we could have someone do step 1 and step 15, for instance. Also, suppose we want a layout which encourages people to work together. One of the problems with the good old standard assembly line layout is you have these stations, one after another, and that really doesn't foster teamwork. So, how can we change this? How can we improve the layout here such that we increase teamwork, we facilitate teamwork, and also we can change the order in which people perform these steps of the process? Well, how about this? How about a U-shaped layout where we have several people working together within this U-shaped layout? How about this? Does this better facilitate teamwork? Does this allow for more flexibility in combining tasks of a process? Yeah, I think it does. The idea here is by having these U-shaped layouts, workers have better access. They have better access to different steps of the process. They have better access to each other. Also, if you have cross-training throughout the process, in other words, people know how to perform different tasks within the process, we can better balance the labor within the process. So this allows for fewer employees to do the same amount of work. Now, there are some other benefits to this U-shaped layout. Things like reducing employee movement. After all, the work is right around us. Employees don't have to go far to get stuff done. Also, it enhances communication. After all, everybody's more or less in the same spot. And it facilitates inspection because people are right there, people are available, people can see what's going on. So, all these are nice and spiffy for your good old production process layout where we're making goods. The problem is about 80% of our economy nowadays is a service economy. So what do we do about services? What can we do about services? Well, there's a few ideas here. First, if you restrict the offerings, or you package them into fixed offerings, that standardizes things. The example I love to go to time and again with regard to this modular focus, with regard to restricting the offerings, is what you're seeing in fast food with regard to Five Guys in regards to In-N-Out Burger. Their menus are very small, very limited. Well, they have the quote-unquote secret menu, but they don't advertise the secret menu. By restricting the offerings, these people get very good at what they do because they don't have a lot of different processes to remember. They only have to remember a couple of offerings, a couple of product offerings available. So you see this in restaurants. You also see it with regard to investment and insurance issues because, well, while each family, while each household has different needs with regards to their insurance, with regards to their investment, they can be put into convenient categories. So you don't need to have a customized investment plan for each person. You can have set goals. You can have set packages that you can offer to each customer. A second example of this can be found with automation. With automation, instead of having a person there taking care of the service, you have a machine there taking care of the service. You have a computer somewhere taking care of the service. Good example of this. Good old direct deposit for your paycheck. Instead of getting this slip of paper every week or every 2 weeks and going down to the bank, the paycheck is automatically deposited in the bank. The money goes directly into the bank. So suddenly, instead of all of this human work involved with, handing out the checks, people going to the bank to put the check in the bank, all of that, instead of that work, you have a computer that automates it for you. In the same way, an ATM, by having an ATM, an automated teller machine, do the work of your typical teller, that's a lot less that you have to pay people with regard to these services. And in that same vein, why not have people do the work themselves? Good old self-service. In this case, people check themselves out. People handle these processes on their own. So by having the customer handle any services, rather than having somebody there to take care of the services, well, the customer gets it done at their speed, at their pace. We're seeing self-checkout a lot at supermarkets nowadays. You see it at Walmart most specifically. Also, internet ordering. There, who's checking everything out? Who's selecting the items and who's making the order? The customer. So, for the past 2.5 videos, we've talked about change. We've talked about improving the process. There's just one problem, and that is that you will always find resistance to change. A good example. Most of us don't remember the days when it was just Ma Bell Bell Telephone Company. And we would actually have to rent telephones from the telephone company. Well, of course, got broken up. Bell got broken up into the baby bells, and all of a sudden there was competition in the industry. But that still didn't change how some people viewed their phone service. Even into the 2000s, and the statistic I'm trying to remember is from about 2005, there were over 1 million people still renting their phone, renting their landline phone, because that's just the way they'd done it. That's the way they'd done it for over 20 years. That's the only thing they'd known. So, one of the issues that comes from business is that people will have resistance to change. The question is, how do you overcome that resistance? So, people have resistance to change. Why? Well, there's all sorts of different reasons. First, from an organizational perspective, it's a threat to resources. Whenever change happens within a company, resources are going to be reallocated. Some people may get less. People don't like having less. Threat to established power, same thing. And before it was a reallocation of resources, now it's a reallocation of power. A lack of focus. One of the problems with change is that sometimes it's done haphazardly. Sometimes it doesn't have a strong direction. It doesn't have a strong driving force. In that case, well, it just sort of goes by the wayside, and we'll see how that happens in a bit. And then there's good old inertia. People don't like change. And people like to do what they do, how they've always done it, because they're comfortable with it. This is true of groups, and this is true of structures. It's hard to alter these. It's hard to change these. So people will resist. Like I said, people will resist. So, why? Well, whenever there's change, there's uncertainty. Personal uncertainty. People start to fear. People start to fear for their jobs. After all, change may mean that people lose their jobs. People start to fear that they'll have more work than they had before. After all, when you reshuffle work, sometimes people will have more work. Also, when you make these changes, that changes how people work. So people may fear more work being added to their pile. Also, people may fear that nothing will change. That, this is just the latest management fad that upper management has decided on, and in a week they'll change their mind. In that vein, sometimes management doesn't do a good job of supporting the change. That's the thing. It's not enough to say, let's change things. But you need to support the change. You need to be there to help out this transition. And if you do not help out this transition, well, any change you make is going to go by the wayside because people will reject it. So, how do you make change work? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to plan it. You have to know what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. So you have to have the plan there. That plan may change, but it needs to be there and it needs to be visible. You need to manage the change. You need to guide it from one step to the next as this change occurs, as it evolves your company. And then there's this last one. It's the one that all too many managers neglect, and that is reinforcing the change. All too many managers think, okay, the change is made, life is done, life is good, we're done, let's go on to the next thing. Life doesn't work that way. You have to reinforce the change. You have to reinforce this adjustment to the culture of your company, because that is what you are adjusting. You are adjusting the culture, the norms of your company, and people do not like what they consider to be familiar, what they see as comfortable, going away. So you have to reinforce a change, and you have to support the change. So, what makes a change successful? First, people have to believe in the leader's vision. People have to believe that this change is good, that it's worth it, that this needs to happen. People need to understand why there needs to be change. People need to understand why these things need to happen. You have to explain it. You have to win the logic argument. You do have to win the logic argument in order for it to work. Otherwise, people are going to resist. And finally, this is the big one. People have to feel support for the change and for the change process. This isn't, oh, keep it up, keep up the good work. This is, I'm running into a problem with this change implementation. Can you help me? And management saying, okay, here's how we help you. Here's some resources. Here's some help. It's not enough that the leader have this belief. It's not enough that people understand why it has to happen. There also has to be support for it. And if there isn't support for it, it's going to fail. So, how do you get people involved? How do you get people wanting this change? How do you get people understanding this change? Well, you get people understanding this change by having them design the change. By getting employees involved in these improvements. Suddenly it's not some manager, some leader saying, this is what we need to do. This is what should be done. It's everybody saying, hey, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to get done. There's a big difference between someone saying, this is how it is, and an entire company saying, this is what we need. So, you need to talk to people. When people need support for this change, it needs to be there. You need to build teams. You need to build consensus. You need to build groups. You should not shut anyone out of this process. If you shut anybody out of this process of improvement, well, that's an easy way to have resistance to the change. So, get your workers involved. Get your workers making decisions. Get your workers designing the change on their own. And by doing that, it's no longer some manager's responsibility. It is owned by the company, and it becomes the company's change. Now, believe it or not, there has been some debate as to whether or not employee empowerment really is empowering the employees. After all, management still makes the decisions as to what changes need to happen. Well, I guess the best way to put it is this. It's your employees who are on the front line. It's your employees who see these processes every day, who see what goes on every day. There is no guarantee that they have to be listened to with everything involved with the process. There's no guarantee in that. But if they are involved in the process of making change, of designing this change, to them, it will still be their change. Now, a couple other tips. First of all, when it comes to changing the business, when it comes to changing your process, focus on the process. If you focus on people, people will tend to consider it an attack. After all, when you make change, some people are not going to be in a better position as a result. So if it's clear that you're out to improve the process, not to attack other people, but to improve the process, in general, people will help. Now, one other thing. It's a good idea to keep your employees happy. After all, if people feel like it's their process, it's their work, in general, they'll feel a sense of ownership and they'll be happier about the process. Now, keep in mind the flip side of that, and that is if employees aren't happy, if employees quit, if employees leave, it costs money to replace them. After all, you have to post the job in the want ads. You have to sometimes fly people in for interviews. You have to write up the job opening. You have to train people. You have to do all of these things to hire an employee. Now, this is not something you want to do often. You want to have a stable, happy, and effective work environment for your people. So, change is important. Change is good, but you need to get your people on board. So, to summarize a few things that we've seen. Value stream mapping. The idea, we get a detailed representation of the current process, draw it out visually so that we can see it, and then use that picture, use that visual representation to see what areas we can improve, to see what parts of the process we can improve and how to improve it. So from the present state, we design a future state with the waste in the process reduced or eliminated. With a just-in-time process, here we want to reduce the inefficiencies in the process to a certain point, specifically to where we have one unit at a time flow. In other words, if we want to make in batches of one, we can do that. Where we produce at the rate of customer demand. In other words, we don't make it until they order it. And to that same end, we have a pull system. So we don't order material until it's needed, either using a Kanban system or a make-to-order system. Also, with a just-in-time process, quality issues are fixed immediately because we know about them immediately. And in-process inventory is drastically reduced in order to expose the problems and inefficiencies in the process, and by exposing them, eliminate them. So, with these processes, with lean processes, we clean up the waste, literally. We make a cleaner environment for our process. So we design the workplace to facilitate teamwork, facilitate flexibility, facilitate it such that we can expand the process if needed. That said, all of these are forms of change, and people will resist change at both the organizational and individual levels. So, to implement change, it's not enough just to plan, it's not enough just to manage it, but you have to support it. You have to put your resources behind this change. You have to put your support behind this change. And ultimately, it's a good idea to get your employees involved in designing and implementing the change. Because if it's their process, if they take ownership of it, then they're far more likely to facilitate and support this change as it's occurring.